Insurance adjusters in South Florida do not want you to see this video because once you realize that people in Marion County, Florida, are paying $1,700 a year for homeowners insurance, while folks down in Boca Raton are shelling out over $14,000 for the same coverage, you start asking some very uncomfortable questions about where you chose to buy a house. This is 11 Florida towns where hurricanes almost never make a direct hit, backed by NOAA records elevation data and the exposed pricing that proves the risk gap is real. We've got a town that NASA handpicked specifically because storms keep missing it. A retirement community of 76,000 people where residents say they've never even seen floodwater in nearly 2 decades. A tiny city that got held hostage by ransomware hackers for almost $500,000 in Bitcoin, which is somehow still less dramatic than a Category 4, and a purpose-built solar-powered town that survived Hurricane Ian without losing power, while 2.6 million other Floridians sat in the dark. If this video saves you from buying a house in a hurricane bullseye, the least you can do is hit subscribe. I'm just saying. Let's count it down. Number 11. Leesburg. When I first drove into Leesburg, I thought I'd accidentally left Florida. The town sits on the Harris Chain of lakes about 45 miles northwest of Orlando, surrounded by water that isn't the ocean. Around 23,000 people live here, and most of them discovered it the same way I did, by accidentally taking a wrong turn and realizing the place was actually kind of perfect. Leesburg consistently scores a 0 on hurricane and tropical storm risk analyses. 0. Not low, not minimal. 0. The town is far enough inland that storm surge is a non-issue, and by the time any hurricane reaches this part of Central Florida, it's already losing steam from the lack of warm ocean water feeding it. The vibe here is Old Florida lakeside living meets Orlando commuter town. You can get to Disney World in under an hour, but your neighborhood still feels like a small southern town where people wave from their porches. Every spring, Leesburg hosts Bike Fest, which has drawn over 250,000 motorcycle enthusiasts annually since 1997. So for one weekend a year, the population multiplies by 10, and then everyone leaves and it goes back to being quiet and completely unbothered by hurricanes. It's also a short drive from Mount Dora and the Villages, which means retirees have been quietly flooding in for years. The cost of living is below the national average, and the housing market hasn't exploded the way Orlando's has. If you want Florida without the Florida drama, Leesburg is the opening act. Number 10. Avon Park. Avon Park calls itself the City of Charm, and when I visited, I understood why. It's the oldest city in Highlands County, home to about 10,000 people. And it sits at 112 feet above sea level on the Lake Wales Ridge. That ridge is an ancient chain of sand dunes running down the spine of Central Florida. Millions of years ago, it was its own island chain while the rest of the peninsula was underwater. Today, it gives these towns something rare in Florida: actual elevation. The real draw here is the price tag. Average home values in Avon Park have historically sat far below the state average. We're talking roughly $88,000 compared to a statewide figure north of $255,000. You read that right. You can buy a house in Florida for less than a loaded pickup truck. When I was driving through the residential neighborhoods, I kept pulling up listings on my phone and doing double takes. 3-bedroom homes with screened-in porches and citrus trees in the backyard, listed for less than what some people in South Florida pay in annual insurance premiums. Downtown Avon Park has a mile-long historic main street with a citrus heritage feel that hasn't been bulldozed by chain restaurants yet. The town is surrounded by lakes and sits about an hour or two from the nearest beaches. Storm surge can't reach Avon Park. It's physically impossible. The trade-off is that this isn't a glamorous Florida destination. No nightlife, no craft cocktail bars, no influencers. And for a lot of people reading the insurance bill, that's the entire point. Number 9. Palatka. Palatka caught me off guard. This small city of about 10,500 people sits on the St. Johns River, roughly 60 miles south of Jacksonville, and it keeps showing up on safest Florida towns lists for a reason. The river bends sharply here. The town is far enough inland to avoid the worst coastal surge, and the geography just works. What surprised me was the charm. Palatka is part of the Florida Main Street program, which means the historic downtown has been preserved and restored with murals, local shops, and buildings that actually look like they belong in Florida's past. When I walked through Ravine Gardens State Park, which is right here in town, I genuinely forgot I was in Florida. This massive natural ravine drops into formal gardens with steep bluffs and canopy trails. Every spring, it hosts the Florida Azalea Festival, and thousands of azalea bushes explode in color along the ravine walls. The town has a St. John's River State College campus and a quiet, unhurried energy that feels like Florida before everyone discovered Florida. The housing is genuinely affordable, not affordable for Florida affordable, but actually affordable. Insurance premiums here are low because the hurricanes tend to track either west toward the Gulf or north up the Atlantic coast, leaving Palotka sitting comfortably in the calm interior. The St. Johns River can flood during extreme rain events, so check your specific lot's flood zone before buying. But storm surge from the ocean? Not happening here. Palatka is the kind of place where you move ironically and then never leave. Number 8. Lake City. Lake City blew my mind. Not because it's flashy, it's not. It's a small town of about 13,000 people sitting at the junction of Interstate 75 and Interstate 10 in north central Florida. But it sits at roughly 170 feet above sea level, which makes it one of the highest incorporated cities in the entire state. In a place where most of the land barely clears 20 feet, 170 feels like you're on a mountain. And here's the kicker. A climate risk analysis by Climate Alpha, which was commissioned by the Wall Street Journal, ranked Lake City number 1 in Florida for the lowest combined storm risk. Number 1, not Gainesville, not Orlando, not Ocala. Lake City. The Gulf storms make landfall to the south and west. The Atlantic storms curve north before they arrive, and the elevation means surge isn't even a conversation. Now, Lake City did make national news in 2019, but not for a hurricane. The city got hit by a ransomware attack that locked down its entire computer system, and they ended up paying roughly $480,000 in Bitcoin to the hackers to get their files back, which is honestly the most modern Florida crisis I've ever heard of. No wind damage, no flooding, just some hacker in a dark room somewhere holding the city's spreadsheets hostage. The cost of living here is low. The proximity to both Jacksonville and Gainesville is convenient, and you can buy a house without worrying about whether your roof will still be attached in October. Lake City isn't glamorous. It won't show up on any Instagram travel account, but it has something that flashier Florida towns don't. Stability. And at 170 feet above sea level, it has something even rarer. High ground. Number 7. Gainesville. When I first visited Gainesville, I expected a college town and nothing more. What I found was a surprisingly well-positioned city of about 141,000 people sitting on rolling terrain between 50 and 200 feet above sea level. It's roughly 50 miles east of the Gulf and 60 miles west of the Atlantic. That dual buffer gives it a protection that most Florida cities can only dream of. Gainesville has been assigned a hurricane score of 0 in multiple risk analyses. The University of Florida anchors the economy. The food scene is legitimately good, and the town has a progressive, artsy energy that feels more like Austin than the Florida stereotype. Hurricane Irma in 2017 dropped over 6 inches of rain and brought some weakened storm impacts, but nothing catastrophic. Hurricane Helene in 2024 brought winds around 60 miles per hour, which is closer to a bad thunderstorm than an actual hurricane. The insurance premiums here reflect the safety. Alachua County sits in that golden inland band of north central Florida, where the rates are a fraction of what coastal residents pay. Combined with the university hospital, the cultural offerings, and the fact that you can actually walk around downtown without melting as badly as you would in Miami, Gainesville quietly checks a lot of boxes. The only downside is that on Gator game days, the population doubles and the entire city becomes a tailgate. Whether that's a downside depends on how you feel about orange and blue face paint at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Number 6. The Villages. I'll be honest. I went into The Villages expecting to mock it. A master-planned retirement community of over 76,000 people sprawling across Sumter, Lake, and Marion counties with its own golf cart highway system? It sounds like a satire of Florida retirement. But then I talked to people who actually live there, and they all said the same thing. They've never experienced flooding. They've never had significant wind damage. In nearly 2 decades, most of them couldn't remember a single hurricane event that disrupted daily life in any meaningful way. The Villages sits in inland central Florida with extensive emergency infrastructure built into the community design. The roads are built for drainage, the buildings meet modern wind codes, and the sheer size of the development means they have their own emergency response coordination that most small towns can't match. The golf cart thing isn't a joke, by the way. There are dedicated golf cart lanes, golf cart tunnels under major roads, and golf cart parking at every shopping plaza. When I visited, I watched a couple in their 70s cruise past me in a custom cart with a sound system playing classic rock on the way to happy hour. They waved. I waved back. They looked like the happiest people I'd ever seen, and their roof was still intact because hurricanes don't really come here. The community also spans 3 counties, which means it benefits from the low insurance rates of all 3. If you've been watching this far and finding it useful, go ahead and hit that like button. It actually helps this video reach more people who are trying to figure out where in Florida won't blow away. And while you're at it, subscribing takes about half a second, and we cover the best places to live, retire, and invest in America every single week. Now. The top 5 is where this list gets truly wild. Number 5, the Space Coast. This one shattered everything I thought I knew about hurricane safety in Florida. Brevard County sits on 72 miles of Atlantic coastline. It has Cocoa Beach, Melbourne, Palm Bay, Titusville. It looks like it should be a hurricane magnet. And yet no major hurricane Category 3 or higher has made a direct landfall in Brevard County since records began in the 1850s. We're talking over 175 years of dodging the big ones. When I stood on the beach at Cape Canaveral and looked at the Atlantic, I kept thinking about the fact that NASA reportedly studied this pattern before choosing to build Kennedy Space Center here. You don't park a multi-billion-dollar space shuttle on a coastline that gets hammered by hurricanes every few years. The reason comes down to oceanography and geography. The Gulf Stream runs about 30 miles offshore, and there's a slight eastward curve in the coastline that locals call the Brevard Bump. This geographic quirk, combined with typical northward steering currents, tends to push hurricane eye walls just offshore at the last moment. Close calls have happened. Hurricane David in 1979 brought 90-mile-per-hour gusts to Melbourne. Hurricane Matthew in 2016 generated a 107-mile-per-hour gust at a Cape Canaveral tower. Hurricane Dorian in 2019 crawled up the coast and had everyone in Brevard holding their breath. But direct major hits, they keep missing, over and over, for 175 years. Now, before you sell your house in Tampa and move to Cocoa Beach tomorrow, I need to be honest. Tropical Storm Faye in 2008 dumped over 20 inches of rain on Brevard County, proving that even weak storms cause real problems. Lower risk does not mean no risk. But 175 years without a direct major hit is a statistical anomaly that even NOAA can't fully explain. And NASA bet billions of dollars of spacecraft on it being real. Number 4, Ocala. Ocala is the crown jewel of this list, and the data backs it up. A climate forecasting analysis by Climate Alpha, published with the Wall Street Journal in October 2023, found that Ocala had the lowest combined hurricane, flood, and wind risk of any city on the Florida Peninsula. When they factored in high winds, drought, and inland flooding together, Ocala came in 3rd statewide behind only Lake City and Tallahassee. The town sits at roughly 100 feet above sea level, about 45 miles from the Gulf Coast and 75 miles from the Atlantic. Hurricanes Irma and Idalia brought wind and rain, but nothing that made the national news. Marion County's average homeowners insurance runs about $1,730 per year. Compare that to Monroe County in the Keys at over $7,100, or the insanity of Boca Raton at over $14,500. You could insure a home in Ocala for nearly a decade for what 1 year costs in Boca. When I first visited Ocala, I was struck by the horse farms. This is the horse capital of the world, home to thoroughbred breeding operations and the World Equestrian Center, which is one of the most impressive equestrian facilities on the planet. The rolling pastures and white fenced paddocks feel more like Kentucky bluegrass country than Florida. There's one caveat, and it's important. Ocala sits in what geologists call Florida's Sinkhole Alley, and Marion County's 367,000 acres of Ocala National Forest make wildfire the #1 natural disaster risk, according to FEMA. So you're trading hurricane risk for sinkholes and forest fires. Florida always finds a way to keep you humble. Number 3, Sebring. Sebring is the town that made me rethink what affordable Florida living could look like. It sits on the Lake Wales Ridge in south central Florida, about 90 minutes from either coast, with a population of around 11,400 people. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has consistently placed the Sebring metro area among the least expensive places to live in the entire country. The Lake Wales Ridge gives Sebring the same elevation advantage that protects Avon Park and Claremont. That natural high ground means storm surge simply cannot reach here. When I walked along the shores of Lake Jackson in downtown Sebring, the old Florida character was immediately obvious. Live oaks dripping with Spanish moss, a charming main street, and an energy that doesn't feel like it's trying to sell you anything. The town is famous for Sebring International Raceway and the 12 Hours of Sebring Endurance Race, which USA Today voted North America's #1 motorsports event. So once a year, this sleepy lake town becomes ground zero for professional racing, then goes right back to being a place where your biggest concern is whether the fish are biting. A fair warning, though. First Street Foundation data still rates Highlands County with a high wind risk despite its inland position. Elevation solves the surge problem, but wind travels over land just fine. Getting out of the hurricane's water doesn't mean you're out of its air. Number 2. Claremont. Claremont broke my brain a little, because when I drove into town from Orlando, about 22 miles to the west, the road started going uphill. In Florida. Uphill. The elevation here ranges from about 116 feet to 307 feet, putting it near the highest natural point on the entire Florida peninsula. Sugarloaf Mountain, just outside Claremont, reaches 312 feet. In a state where the average elevation is 6 feet above sea level, this is genuinely bizarre. The town sits on the northern end of the Lake Wales Ridge, that ancient island chain turned sand dune spine. And the rolling hills here look nothing like the flat, swampy Florida you see in the movies. About 54,000 people call Claremont home, and the population is growing at roughly 3.5% per year as people from Orlando discover you can live 22 minutes from the theme parks on actual hills with actual terrain and actual protection from storm surge. When I drove through the neighborhoods, I noticed something you almost never see in Florida. Cyclists. Actual road cyclists in full kit grinding up real inclines. Claremont has become a major triathlon training destination because the hills provide something the rest of the state simply cannot. Elevation change. The National Training Center is here, and Olympic athletes have trained on these roads. In Florida, on hills. The 1956 Florida Citrus Tower still stands here as a reminder of the area's agricultural past, and on a clear day, you can see for miles from the observation deck. Median home values range from the high $300,000 to around $473,000, and the cost of living index sits around 92, which is below the national average of 100. For the Orlando metro area, that's a steal. Claremont combines the surge immunity of inland elevation with the convenience of Orlando's economy, airport, and infrastructure. And the hills. I can't get over the hills. I realize that sounds ridiculous, but until you've lived in Florida and driven on nothing but flat ground for 3 years, you cannot appreciate what a gentle slope does for the soul. Number 1, Babcock Ranch. When I first heard about Babcock Ranch, I thought it was marketing hype, a solar-powered town near Fort Myers engineered to withstand a Category 5, underground utilities, native landscaping designed to absorb floodwater, and roads graded to direct water away from homes? Come on. Then Hurricane Ian made landfall in September 2022 as a Category 4 with winds near 150 miles per hour. It was one of the strongest storms to ever hit the United States. It knocked out power to over 2.6 million Florida customers. 90% of Charlotte County lost electricity. Fort Myers was devastated. The images of destruction across southwest Florida dominated the news for weeks. Babcock Ranch, sitting just northeast of Fort Myers in Charlotte County, didn't lose power. It didn't lose water. Developer Sid Kitson told reporters that the only damage was a few felled trees and some shingles torn from roofs. While the rest of southwest Florida was dealing with catastrophic flooding, structural collapses, and weeks without electricity, the residents of Babcock Ranch were watching television in their air-conditioned homes, wondering what all the fuss was about. The town actually became a shelter for surrounding communities. People from Fort Myers and Cape Coral drove to Babcock Ranch because it was the closest place with working power and clean water. A town designed to protect its own residents ended up protecting its neighbors. The town generates its electricity from an 870-acre solar field, the largest in Florida. The utilities are underground, so there are no above-ground power lines to snap in high winds. The streets are designed as water management channels that funnel rainwater into retention areas instead of letting it pool around foundations. The landscaping uses native Florida plants that absorb water instead of the ornamental species that turn into projectiles during a storm. The homes themselves are built to modern Florida building codes, which were dramatically upgraded after Hurricane Andrew destroyed Homestead in 1992. Reinforced concrete block construction, impact-resistant windows, and roof strapping that keeps everything attached when the wind starts screaming. Babcock Ranch proves something that every town on this list hints at. Hurricane safety in Florida isn't just about where you live, it's about how your town is built. Geography gives you the advantage. Engineering locks it in. If you made it all the way to number 1, you're clearly someone who thinks before they buy. So do yourself a favor. Subscribe to this channel because we break down the best places to live, the smartest real estate moves, and the towns nobody is talking about yet every single week. Hit the like button if any of these towns surprised you, and drop a comment telling me which one you'd actually move to. Because I'll tell you right now, after spending time in all 11 of these places, my answer might surprise you. I'll see you in the next one.